The end of a very long day. The medical emergency in Phuket was over by late afternoon, and people from other areas were receiving first aid nearest to where they were hit. More details were seeping through from various sources, and we learned that on the mainland, Khao Lak had been devastated. The distance between Khao Lak and Phuket is about the same as the distance between San Diego and Los Angeles. This misreporting was to have a massively negative impact on Phuket's recovery and the recovery of its tourism industry for a long time afterwards, with many people assuming that Phuket was similarly damaged. It wasn't. CNN were, some would say, predictably the worst offender, reporting that the resorts in the Laguna area were washed away. These were the same resorts I was driving towards when the wave came, and no one was killed. The resort buildings were absolutely intact, and injuries were slight. The reporter did his piece from the top of a cliff at one of the most exclusive hotels on the island, a long way away from any of the actual impact. In Phuket, around 260 souls died. At the time I wrote these notes, in Khao Lak 4,000 and still counting had died. That figure rose quite significantly and did not account for the migrant workers from Burma who were there in their thousands working on building sites, who were also killed because they weren't registered. We also heard that Phi Phi Island, not Fifi Island as one journalist insisted on calling it, was in an awful state too. And that's not surprising given that all the accommodation at the time on Phi Phi was beach huts, and there was no meaningful hospital care there. Panga on the mainland in the south was also hit badly. In the afternoon, we started to receive people from these areas, some for advanced medical care not available in the provinces, and some came to look for the missing. What they had to tell us was horrific. Khao Lak had been laid flat. This is a family resort, very popular with Scandinavians and Germans, and we all speculated that their pristine beaches would have been full of kids, both local and visitors. Tragically, we were proven right. Most of the people from these areas were evacuated either to Takwa Pa, further north up the coast, or to Panga, to the south. Bodies were already being collected off the beaches and taken to some of the larger temples in all areas. At around 8 p.m, I headed home, and as I neared home, I had to pass a local police station. It was swarmed with foreigners. This was an inland station, and I knew that the police there would not have good English, so I turned the car into the car park to see if I could help. 100 questions later, I'd established that all these people had tried to leave the island, but there were no flights out, and they'd been redirected to this police station to try and get some accommodation. It was looking likely that they'd have to sleep in the station, as all the remaining hotels were full. The station was not air-conditioned, and it was hot. I called Claire, the owner of my local pub Pepper's Bar, and asked if I could bring these folks to the pub to get something to eat and maybe sleep in an air-conditioned environment, meaning the pub. She agreed without hesitation, so I suggested this to the people assembled. One German man had been pestering the police and then me about insurance forms for his lost possessions. I told him several times that I could not help with this matter politely. The last time he asked, I asked him to firmly let it drop. He then muttered a bunch of expletives in his mother tongue as he turned around. I called him the worst kind of swear word in German that I knew, often used by the Russian army in the war and unknown to most non-Germans, and he went bright red. I put my arm around him. I told him I was sorry. It had been a very long day. I announced to the assembled 30 or so people remaining that the police had agreed to send several English-speaking officers to the pub later, and would also drive us all there to get fed and watered. I stated that once we were there, we would try to get them rooms with local expats, and if we could not find enough, we'd let them sleep in the pub. "How much will this cost?" said a Scandinavian. I just laughed. Money had no relevance here. We formed a convoy of waifs and strays in the back of assorted police vehicles and pickups and set off to the pub. On the way, a group of 4 backpackers caught our attention. They were heading down a long rural road with nothing but farms for a good few kilometres, so I slowed down and asked if we could help. They said they were okay and they were going to find an hotel just down the road and pointed at their Lonely Planet guide confidently. I explained that I lived in the area and that there were not any hotels for the next 10 kilometres. They huddled, decided that they trusted their book more than me, and declined our offer. I'd brought our convoy to a halt and everyone was beeping to get a move on, so I concluded that you just can't help some people, and we drove on. On arrival at Pepper's, there was a definite Dunkirk spirit. Everyone was telling their own stories about the day and drinking heavily. Rumours were being both dealt and scotched, and we all considered ourselves very lucky indeed. Not one of our close friends had been killed or injured. I began to learn that most of our little community had immersed itself in the recovery effort, and that some had done nothing at all. Months later, those that did nothing were all dealing with their own feelings about this. Many like to talk about the money that they donated. Most make excuses, and some direct resentment towards me. I can forgive them not doing anything. I can understand that. But I cannot find a way to look kindly on their simmering bitterness towards me. There have been tangible consequences of their feelings too. I wasn't welcome in certain company. Their discomfort was most obvious when tourists wanted to know about our experiences with hurried and clumsy conversational changes. The thing is, I never, ever judged them. We all did what we could. It is always the case that some can't. One day, I'd hoped to help them deal with their own guilt. If only they'd given me the chance to show them that I accepted them and their role. But in the company of some people, it felt like just my presence was a reminder of something that they hadn't dealt with, maybe felt shame over. And they shouldn't feel like that. We all can't do something. I was compelled to help. I had no choice. And if you're cynical, think about this. Everyone on the island knew I was a nurse. Now imagine how I would have been dealt with subsequently if I hadn't done anything. Now, that's not why I did what I did. I did what I did because that's the kind of bloke I am. There's lots of people like me. I learned most people are like that. I learned that we can be beautiful, magnificent beasts when the shit hits the fan. The other thing is that the profile of the work I did was higher than most, though not any more important. This is due to a BBC team being based at the hospital where I worked and their subsequent documentary, The Killer Waves. This was shown widely around the world on the BBC and Discovery Channel. But believe it or not, this led to comments such as, "He only helped to get on the telly," and "Trev Fisher, the Tsunami celebrity." I helped because I could. And because I should. The BBC team that made the documentary arrived. I'd got a phone call asking if I had any objection to them being there, and I said no, as long as they stay out of the way. And they did. Because that team had done a lot of work in dangerous areas, they were a resource for me. Frank and his team became a space that I could go to blow off steam. They were not just filming this like some sort of media parasites. They were involved, and they helped me a lot. Day 2. Monday morning. I woke at 6 a.m. and immediately turned on the news. Not much seemed to have happened except that there were more live journalists on the scene now. The CNN guy had actually ventured into the damaged areas and hilariously had chosen a site that was a construction site before the tsunami, so it looked beat up before the wave. Kylie Morris from the BBC did a measured piece from one of the hospitals, and it contained none of the apocalyptic language of the tabloid stations like Fox and Sky. I went to the Phuket Gazette website, which was to be an invaluable tool for the first few weeks, and I read the following.
The official tally for dead and missing in and around Phuket as a result of yesterday's tsunami now stands at 122 and 355 respectively, according to the Bureau of Emergency Medical Services System, Naranthorn Centre, of the Ministry of Public Health. A further 1,027 people are reported as injured, although one local private hospital confirmed that it alone had received 779 casualties. Consular representatives from 28 nations are offering assistance and advice to their nationals at Provincial Hall on Naresuan Road in Phuket City. The Gazette is currently trying to ascertain which countries are represented and will publish the names and contact numbers as soon as they're available. The British Embassy has set up a temporary office at the courtyard on Chow Phar West Road, 2.4 kilometres south of Central Festival on the Bypass Road. British consular officials are also at Provincial Hall.
I couldn't have breakfast, as we were out of everything that I can eat. However, the fridge was full of stuff like rotted fish paste, eggs soaked in urine, deep-fried chicken sinew, and barbecued assorted insects, including cockroaches. And all the things that pass for food in the Asian division of our house. There was no bread, no butter, and I was out of tea bags. That's about as bad a start to a day as I can imagine. I decided to call Peter at the hospital, and as I switched my phone on, I received a steady flow of concern and messages from the day before from friends and family in the UK. I sent out a blanket text to everyone, reassuring them that I was fine. I called Peter and got through immediately, a miracle. He said it might be a good idea if I came in, so I went straight to the car and headed for the hospital. The hospital at the time had a postage stamp-sized car park, but this day and for the rest of the time I was working there, I got a perfect spot. My day was improving no end. As I approached the building, I saw that a wall of pictures had appeared overnight. I'd seen there like before, after the September 11 attacks in New York. I approached the boards, unsure whether I wanted to look. In the documentary The Killer Waves, the respected BBC war correspondent Jeremy Bowen spoke most articulately and movingly about how one feels when you see them for real.
Now, what makes these notice boards even more poignant and almost unbearable to look at is the fact that the people in the pictures look so happy. These are photos that were taken at celebrations, at birthdays, at weddings, at parties, on holidays. I saw notice boards like this in New York after the attacks of 9/11, and after people started realizing that everybody in the pictures was dead, they became, in their own way, not appeals for information, but memorials about what had happened.
One picture struck me. It was of a 2 to 3 year old boy. His blonde-haired, blue-eyed face was covered in mosquito bites, and as I was looking at it, one of the hospital staff came up to me and said, "Kuntrev, this boy, he stay here." I walked a short distance and sat on a table under the hospital Christmas tree was that same little boy. He'd been brought in overnight by an American couple who'd found him on the beach in Khao Lak. I found out later, when they were interviewed on Larry King, that amazingly the woman from the couple had survived the 9/11 attacks. Note to self, either avoid her completely or stay close to this woman if you ever see her again. The sign around the kid's neck had been made by the Thai hospital staff, and it simply said, "No name, no know my country, about 3." I tried to talk to him in the languages I knew to no avail. More people were arriving, and I asked everyone who came who looked remotely Scandinavian to talk to him. We thought we got a response when he responded to someone speaking Norwegian. Someone somewhere was looking for this kid. How do we find them? I went outside the hospital for a smoke and looked at the sky for divine inspiration. It was a mighty shock when it came, I can tell you. From nowhere, the thought occurred to me that I should phone Chris Husted, the deputy editor of the Phuket Gazette, and get him to take a picture of the kid and post it on the Gazette website. Now, Chris must have been officially the busiest man in Asia that day, but he said he'd come around on his break. His office was only 5 minutes away. Chris appeared at 11:30. Anyone who knows him well will tell you that Chris was inordinately proud and knowledgeable about his digital camera, and will point out its many features without any prompting at all. During this, he will treat any yawns you make as a sign of tiredness and not boredom. It was good to see that amongst the mayhem, some things never changed, as he walked me through the setting he was using for this shot. He took some snaps of the kid and posted it on the Phuket Gazette website by 1 p.m, and we waited. At the main hall of the hospital, Mike, an ex-US Air Force resident of the island, had set up a communications centre. I'd made a call to a friend of mine, Blair Spears, who owned a company called HotelTravel.com, and they turned up with some techs and set up a fast internet connection, or fast for the time, and also a few computers. Mike was the sort of warm and furry type of Christian common in the US interior. He didn't ever push it on you and was a very generous spirit. He also looked like Brains from the Thunderbirds, and he was referred to, by most of us, as such by the rest of us throughout. Several people showed up to volunteer, as they did every day, and my catchphrase for the week became, "I don't know what it is I want you to do yet, but please sit over there and something will turn up." It always did. Some people drove supplies or victims around. Some were able to contribute admin skills. Some made those missing posters for relatives, and some distributed them around the affected areas and hospitals. The various roles became more clearly defined as we learned more of what was needed and where, but in the first few days, it was pretty much a wait-and-see approach. One thing was very clear: IT was going to be crucial. Mobile telephones, especially for text, which seemed to work when you couldn't get a call through, were vital. The internet had a huge beneficial on the suffering and the search for the missing. The case of the 3-year-old kid being just one of hundreds of examples. At exactly 4:15 that afternoon, I got a text from Chris at the Gazette to say, "Kid's family found, Swedish, dad in hospital in Pangar, mother missing." I still have the text on my phone. The Gazette posted the following story on its website later that day.
Family members in Finland saw the photograph of young Hannes Bergström on the Phuket Gazette website and contacted them. The young boy was rescued by a couple and taken to Phuket International Hospital, and was identified as a 20-month-old Swedish boy by the boy's uncle, Tim Karkinen, who was in Pattaya. This happened within an hour of the story going online. Mr. Karkinen told the Gazette that although the father, Marco Bergström, and the boy's grandfather are in Pangar Hospital, no trace has as yet been found of the boy's mother and grandmother. The family was staying in Khao Lak. Arrangements are being made to reunite the family.
We were ecstatic, of course. I'm not slight of build, but I spontaneously jumped in the air on receiving the news. The article in the Gazette proved slightly inaccurate. It was the child's grandmother who was in hospital, not the grandfather, but she was on her way to get him, as was his uncle who lived in Pattaya. This child became part of internet folklore very soon after that. This picture that had been posted on the Gazette site had been sent around the world 1,000,000 times in emails and posted on websites, days and even weeks after the kid had been reunited with the family. The same was true of an older German girl who was also at our hospital. She lost her parents but was returned to Germany on day 3. However, we still received emails about her and pictures circulated on the net giving false hope to those who were looking for a lost child of a similar age, and there were a few of those. This useful tool had a downside, shown 10 days later when I watched Anders and Lise, Ragnar's parents, check their inbox a day after they'd appeared on CNN and the BBC to make an appeal for their little Ragnar. I watched the anticipation created by each of thousands of emails entitled, "Is this your son?" turn to devastation when the mail was opened to reveal the picture of Hannes Bergerstrom at the hospital taken by Chris. It got to a point where we knew the exact size of the attachment and did not even open those emails. As I had instigated that picture and its publication, I felt deeply saddened to watch them. By this time I'd become very close to them. It sounds irrational, but to be honest, there were times as I watched their hearts break again and again that I wished I had not posted that picture of Hannes. I knew these guys. I did not know Hannah's family. The finding of Hannah's remaining family at the time it occurred put a bit of a snap in everyone's celery. There was nothing like a success to focus the mind on the prize. Sadly, Hannah's was the only one of hundreds of cases we were able to help. About lunchtime, a very earnest English chap from CNN appeared. Every time I met him afterwards, he always appeared to be going somewhere urgently or had something more important to do than what he was doing at that moment. He wanted to know 2 things. 1, did we have any Americans? And 2, what about the blonde kid? We didn't have any Americans, except for some outstanding volunteers. He didn't want to talk to them. I also told him the steps that had been taken to find Hannah's family and the success we'd had. A worldwide bona fide scoop for CNN indeed. Thanks a lot, Trev. It's guys like you and your team that inspire us all to make getting up worthwhile. Here's my card. My producer and I would like to take you out for dinner when all this is over. Is what you might think he might have said, and well, you'd be wrong. What he actually said is, "So, when is the granny getting here? I want pictures. When will it be? Can I see the kid now?" I replied that he couldn't have pictures until the validity of the claim on the kid had been established. It may seem strange, but this was very important. There are crazy people out there. Disasters attract them, and there are also desperately bereaved people whose judgment could be impaired by grief. We had to have conclusive proof that the family who were claiming him were who they said they were. He pressed me a little further, and I told him that the grandmother was due the next day, and it was not my permission to give whether he could film the reunion. It was the family's decision. They were still missing his mother, remember? No acknowledgement of my response. He just walked off, looking for somebody else to ask. Within minutes, I got a call from someone at the BBC, telling me they were hoping to film the work of my team over the next day for a documentary. I wasn't really focused on the call and said it would have to be a team decision. They were happy with that and said they would see me the next day. I forgot about the call immediately. More news crews were arriving, the first question always being, have we got anybody from their country? We all knew the media had a job to do, and a very necessary one too. It may go against current thinking, but in my opinion, most were excellent in the way that they conducted themselves. Very few intruded on people's grief or privacy, and most were polite and compliant if we said no to any request. Day 1 after lunch. Towards lunchtime, I noticed that the Norwegian Seamen's Church, an institution I developed a profound and enduring respect for in those days, had set up a camp very close to where we were based. They had sandwiches, good sandwiches too, and imported meat and cheese and fresh baguettes and Nutella. I thought, this is a tight operation. It's a day after the tsunami, and they've already got the sandwiches sorted out. These guys are on fire. Norway had been an unlucky country, with significantly more casualties than anyone else, and an ambassador who sadly was not the right sort of ambassador you need in a crisis. There are several kinds of ambassadors. This one was more of a commercial, administrative type of ambassador. They'd set up their embassy in a different part of town than everybody else. The Swedish embassy was in a bit of the island that even I had never heard of. At least the Norwegians were in the same town as the others. Ambassadors come in all flavours. If you're unlucky enough to be in a crisis, you will wish you have the good fortune to have one of the more robust, confident types as your ambo in the country affected. Nationals from Ireland had the always impressive, all-round good chap Dan Mulhall, and the UK had David Falls, who was fluent in Thai. The UK also had their extraordinary Phuket honorary consul, Alan Dubai Cook, who was ex-Special Boat Service. However, some ambassadors are of the bookish bureaucrat style, and Norway's ambassador was one of these. A dreadful stroke of bad luck, and in the next few days it would become clear that she had utterly underestimated both the nature and urgency of the problems laid before her. In the afternoon, we began to receive more people from Khao Lak, mainly Norwegians, as a result of their makeshift embassy being near our hospital. The whole effort was being manned by an honorary consul who, by all accounts, did the best he could. But it wasn't very much. I had lunch at their desk and returned to my own area, where a line of people who wanted advice or wanted to check our database of hospital inpatients. We had a pretty comprehensive list. One of our volunteers drove around the hospitals and personally collected them several times a day and manually typed them into our own database. Disasters produce lists. List of injured, missing, repatriated, unconscious or gravely ill, and they become a valuable commodity. If you've lost someone and their name is on a hospital inpatient list, this is the best news you can get. Not only are they alive, but they're being cared for, and you can actually go to them. The accuracy of the lists is crucial. In a country that does not speak English, it is guaranteed that some information will be wrong. Added to that, the staff who would normally fill out these lists were swamped on the first day, so some of the information was collected by people who were not qualified to do so. Cleaners, security guards, it was all hands on deck, remember. In such scenarios, Austria as a nationality can easily become Australia, and a non-English speaker can fill out the form in Thai script with some phonetic spellings of Western names. Not a big deal, right? Yes, it is a big deal. On a printed list with 8,000 names on it, you're naturally going to narrow your search down. If you're looking for an Austrian called Frank Schmidt, you will go to the Austrian list first. But he may well be in a hospital and listed as Australian. Another thing is that a Western name written in Thai script only really exists for other Thai people. Very few Westerners read Thai. We all knew that this needed sorting out as soon as possible, and several people on the island had indeed started to do this. The police forensics team, who have a great deal of expertise in this area, were not on the scene yet. Regardless, the many techies, both Thai and foreign, did an astonishing job. They are among the unsung heroes of this disaster. Their role was never acknowledged in any media, to my knowledge, but within 2 days, very good lists have been compiled, checked and posted on various websites set up to help people find their missing. A remarkable achievement. I often say this, I think I've said it already. When the shit hits the fan, we can be beautiful and magnificent beasts. By late afternoon, sadly the board that hosted the missing posters was full on both sides, and several new boards appeared, and they too were soon full. At the end of the first 2 days, there were 7 boards full of missing posters. This gave me the first real inkling of the size of the catastrophe that had befallen us. Although, like the rest of the world, we were still largely ignorant of its true magnitude, we'd started to hear stories from India, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka, but we remained largely innocent of the volume of death and destruction in those wretched places. It was also in the late afternoon that I saw the familiar face of Peter Heppel. He's lived on the island a little longer than me and runs a number of gymnasiums. He was sat in a wheelchair, cuts and bruises all over his body. Peter and I had never been close, but we were once mates. We'd fallen out when he tried it on a bit too much to fiddle the happy hour and drinks at a local pub I was managing, and had been truly rude, obnoxious and disrespectful to me in public. We'd not spoken in the 18 months that had passed until this moment. I approached him and he looked at me in terrible pain, and he waved me away. I accepted and respected this. I called Pete, the hospital administrator, and asked him how serious Peter Heppel's injuries were. He told me that Peter was okay, but he'd lost his baby daughter in the basement of a department store on the beachfront in Patong. This next bit is a tough memory. Even all these years later. Peter was one of the few I just could not reach to help. He was utterly unreachable in his grief. Subsequently, his is one of the faces I see in my nightmares. I've tried to make sense of why I couldn't reach him, and on occasion couldn't even look him in the eye. Unlike people who did not know me before, he could not think about me in any other context than in my life in Phuket. I could say to a tourist that I was a nurse and they accepted this as a fact and afforded me the credibility and trust that goes with that label. Peter had only known me as a disco manager, someone who didn't make a lot of money and a fat, loud bloke, and had made it clear on several occasions that he had no respect for me. I was unable to be anything other than that to him, and this is partly my fault, the result of how I'd chosen to conduct my life in Phuket. I'm not ashamed about how I had lived there, but sometimes I'd not been at my best. So there we were, him with his awful grief and me with the skills to help him, regarding each other warily across the hall of a hospital. How utterly, utterly sad.